Hello and welcome to this new episode of Business Africa. I'm Ndea Yoka, your host for this week. Here are the headlines. The lack of parity persists in access to funding for women-led businesses in Africa. A recent report reveals that between 2019 and 2023, these businesses received only 1.5% of the funds raised. Congo has reached a major milestone by becoming an exporter of liquefied natural gas with the launch of its first shipment in partnership with Eni, thus opening up new economic prospects. And finally, Egypt is set to benefit from a $35 billion investment from the United Arab Emirates, a lifeline for a country mired in an unprecedented economic crisis. Africa is experiencing remarkable growth in entrepreneurship. However, behind the scenes, women face significant obstacles in accessing funding, posing a major challenge to achieving truly inclusive economic growth.
Africa is indisputably buzzing with entrepreneurial spirit, but a worrying reality lies behind this dynamic. A report published on International Women's Day reveals that only 1.5% of funds raised by startups on the continent between 2019 and 2023 went to women-led businesses. The fintech or financial technology sector was the most heavily funded, receiving around 27% of the total funding. In the STEM, science, technology, engineering and mathematics fields, the fact that women are in minority is one of the main obstacles to their access to funding. Moreover, the weak presence of women at the top levels of venture capital funds hinders their investment opportunities. Despite their perseverance and talent, the report emphasizes that African women entrepreneurs still come up against sexist biases that reduce investor interest. Yet, there have been some dazzling successes, particularly in the financial sector, where women entrepreneurs have shined. However, for these success stories to be made durable, concrete measures need to be taken. A significant increase in the number of investment funds dedicated to women-led businesses in Africa has the potential to stimulate inclusive economic growth on the continent.
We welcome Evelyne Dior, Executive Director of WIC Capital, dedicated to women-led businesses in Senegal and the Ivory Coast.
Madame Evelyne Dior, bienvenue dans Business Africa.
You work with women entrepreneurs, so I would like to know what are the main challenges they face in acquiring funding?
In my line of work, we target businesses that aren't necessarily in the tech industry, so mostly growing SMEs. The first challenge we encounter is the level of preparedness for investment. When we look closer, these are generally very small enterprises, with women heavily concentrated in small businesses. At some point, their growth is hindered by a lack of access to capital or proper technical assistance. These are still formal businesses, not very attractive, so when they face investors, it takes more time to convince them. Our approach is intentional because we're here for these businesses. All our processes are tailored to that, especially in how we source them and conduct due diligence. Identifying the gaps isn't seen as obstacles, but rather areas for improvement and post-investment technical assistance.
What are the factors hindering women's access to funding?
There's a genuine concern about the representation of women in the entrepreneurial field. In countries like Senegal or the Ivory Coast, only 30% of business owners are women. The underrepresentation is even more pronounced in tech startups, where only 16% of tech entrepreneurs are women. So what the numbers show is that there aren't enough women entrepreneurs. And when they do raise funds, it's minimal. Not only when they're alongside men, but it's even worse when they're on their own. There are biases in the industry that prevent these women from accessing funding. It's not due to the lack of knowledge or skills. There's a bias in the investment industry. So far, it's said that there aren't enough women represented in leadership roles in investment funds. But the reality is that in Africa too, there's a high representation of women as partners in firms or in decision-making positions in funds than elsewhere in the world. It also shows that the bias isn't solely male. We, as women, need to be educated educated about this bias and integrate it to realize the work that still needs to be done.
Sexist biases are often pointed out. Is this a reality on the ground?
The biases are there, but at the same time, we have figures and data showing that women entrepreneurs manage to achieve more with the little funds they raise. What this tells me is that biases and prejudices are hard to break, because every prejudice we have a figure saying otherwise. But despite this, we're still in the current situation. So whether it's a fund specialized for women-led businesses or not, we need to stop with reports, studies, and really take concrete actions by setting quantifiable goals.
WIC Capital is the result of a collaboration among women entrepreneurs. I would like to know your proposals for promoting gender equality in the entrepreneurial sphere.
To accelerate this and make it mainstream, it must go beyond women. It needs to be a collective awareness, not just because it's an act of justice, but because it's a smart decision as an investor to have a diversified portfolio. Given all this, it's in everyone's interest to talk about it, spread the message, and act on it by translating it into how capital is deployed. And indeed, WIC Capital, we started with women, but then quickly went on to raise funds from international partners to strengthen our firepower.
Evelyne Dior, thank you for answering our question.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure.
Congo is gradually positioning itself in the international market for liquefied natural gas exports. According to the government, this initiative is expected to generate over 44 million euros in the 2024 budget. Cédric Solo reports from Pointe-Noire.
The valve opens to let through the liquefied natural gas now produced in the Republic of Congo, marking a symbolic gesture by the government at Lichenjidi, south of the major oil port. The launch follows an investment of more than 5 billion euro by Eni, the country's second-largest oil producer. An initiative that promises brighter socio-economic prospects.
The Congo LNG project also includes sustainability initiatives focused on improving access to healthcare, water, education, and culture for local communities.
This gas journey also means the creation of direct and indirect jobs, thus improving the living conditions of our populations and consequently acting as undeniable accelerators for their markets towards betterment.
Residents want to improve their quality of life, which largely depends on access to affordable sources of domestic gas to meet their energy needs.
We have more and more gas sales outlets, which helps families, but there is still the issue of prices that consumers find too high. As we eventually go from 5,500 to 6,500 CFA without much explanation.
Since the Russia-Ukraine crisis, global demand for gas has been rising. Congo aims to produce more than 600,000 tons this year and 3 million tons next year for an expected profit of more than 44 million euros in the 2024 budget, in the hope of meeting the needs of a country where 41% of young people are unemployed.
With financial support from the United Arab Emirates and a loan from the International Monetary Fund, Egypt seems to have found its lifeline. But is it enough to overcome the crisis? Hichem Lemify, an expert in international strategy, provides his analysis.
Egypt, facing an acute financial crisis, sees a glimmer of hope thanks to unprecedented support from the United Arab Emirates and the International Monetary Fund, IMF. A historic agreement with the Emiratis has been followed by crucial measures to stabilize the economy, while the IMF has increased its loan from $3 billion to $8 billion.
Through the $35 billion investment from the UAE, notably from the Sovereign Fund of Abu Dhabi, into the Ras El Hikma tourism project in northwest Egypt, acts somewhat like a lifesaver. The Emirates have thus bolstered Egyptian finances by about $10 billion. This is a significant amount for Egypt, which also facilitated unlocking a $3 billion advance from the IMF in exchange for a number of measures, including currency devaluation.
The agreement with the Emirates has helped resolve the shortage of foreign currency and reduce port delays, but according to analyst HMA Lechmishi, more investment in the local industry is needed to ensure sustainable growth.
There are plenty of investments, but they're focused on the service economy, and the vision lacks sufficient emphasis on industrialization, particularly support for SMEs, which remains a major weakness for Egypt.
Abdel Fattah al-Sisi's government is under pressure to stabilize the economy, with annual consumer price inflation at 35.7% in February, up from 29.8% in January.
That's the end of this edition of Business Africa. This episode is available on Africanews.com. See you soon.